Blood pooled on the steering wheel, my vision fading as his voicemail beeped for the 10th time. That was my last memory. Now my phone illuminates with his frantic emergency while I sip a vintage Merlot. I'm not saving Tristan this time. Let his carefully orchestrated karma consume him. Crystal resonated against crystal, a delicate chime that cut through the thick, suffocating haze in my mind. The sound was sharp, grounding, and completely out of place. I blinked, my vision swimming through a blur of muted amber lighting and the deep, rich mahogany of a familiar room. The scent of aged oak, dark cherries, and expensive perfume filled my lungs, violently replacing the metallic stench of copper blood and leaking gasoline that had just been choking me. My hands were shaking. I looked down at my fingers, fully expecting to see them mangled, slick with crimson, and pierced by shards of tempered windshield glass. Instead, my skin was pristine, manicured, wrapped elegantly around the stem of a Riedel wine glass. I drew in a ragged breath, the air catching in my throat as I stared at the dark liquid swirling inside. I was alive. Just seconds ago, or perhaps a lifetime ago, I had been dying on the side of Interstate 95. My SUV crushed beneath the weight of a jackknifed semi-truck. The torrential rain had been freezing against my skin as I lay pinned in the wreckage. My spine shattered, my breath shallow. I had driven into that blinding storm because Tristan had called me, his voice trembling with manufactured terror. He had begged me to bring the encrypted corporate ledgers and the offshore bearer bonds to the downtown penthouse immediately. He claimed a rogue faction of our investors had discovered a discrepancy and were threatening to hand him over to the federal authorities by morning if he didn't produce the physical collateral. Like a devoted, foolish wife, I hadn't hesitated. I grabbed the leather briefcase from our hidden home safe, threw on my coat over my pajamas, and sped into the tempest. When the truck hit me, the impact threw my phone from the dashboard. It landed near my ear, the call still connected. As my life bled out onto the floor mats, the sounds of Tristan's panic miraculously vanished. Through the speaker, I heard the unmistakable pop of a champagne cork. Then, a woman's laughter. Camilla's laughter. "Is the stupid bitch on her way?" Tristan had asked, his voice smooth, relaxed, dripping with venomous amusement. She believed the investor story? Camilla had giggled, her voice muffled as if she were pressing her face into his chest. "You're brilliant, baby. Once she drops the bag at the concierge, you grab it, we catch the jet to Zurich, and she's left holding the bag for the shell companies. She's blindly loyal, Cam. It's pathetic, really, but it works out beautifully for us." Those words were the last things I heard before the cold darkness took me. The sheer, unadulterated betrayal had hurt far worse than the crushed ribs piercing my lungs. I had built Vanguard Logistics from the ground up. I had negotiated the contracts, managed the fleets, balanced the books. Tristan was just the charismatic face, the charming sociopath I had mistakenly trusted with my heart and my proxy votes. Now, a sharp vibration against the oak table jolted me back to the present. My sleek smartphone was dancing across the wood, the screen glowing aggressively with an incoming call. Caller ID, Tristan Urgent. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I glanced at the top corner of the display. November 14th, 8:45 p.m. It was the exact date, the exact time. I had been pulled backward through the fabric of time, dropped precisely into the moment before I ruined my life. "Earth to Valerie?" a voice teased from across the table. I looked up. Sabrina was watching me, her eyebrow arched perfectly, a smirk playing on her lips. Beside her, Dominic was examining the label of the 2012 Chateau Margaux we had just opened, completely oblivious to the earth-shattering paradigm shift occurring inside my head. We were at the Cellar, an exclusive, members-only lounge, 3 blocks from my house. In my previous life, I had canceled this dinner halfway through, apologizing profusely to them as I bolted out the door to save my husband. "You're staring at your phone like it just threatened to murder you," Sabrina noted, taking a delicate sip of her wine. Is Tristan throwing another tantrum because he can't figure out how to reset the Wi-Fi router? The phone continued to buzz, spinning slowly on the table. The urgency in that electronic vibration was palpable. In the penthouse suite across town, Tristan was waiting for me to answer so he could spin his magnificent web of lies. He was waiting to send me to my death so he could fund his elopement with my money. A slow, icy smile spread across my face. The sheer absurdity of the situation washed over me, replacing my residual trauma with a profound, intoxicating sense of power. I was not the terrified, devoted wife anymore. I was a ghost who had returned from the highway wreckage. "No," I said, my voice shockingly steady, devoid of the frantic anxiety that used to plague my every waking moment. "Tristan is just realizing that the world doesn't stop spinning when he snaps his fingers." I reached out, my perfectly manicured index finger hovering over the glowing green button. Then, with a deliberate, deeply satisfying swipe, I dragged it to the red. Call declined. For good measure, I navigated to his contact, tapped the settings, and pressed block caller. I did the same for the home security system alerts and his personal assistance number. I powered the phone down completely, turning the screen into a blank black mirror, and slid it face down onto the mahogany table. "Well," Dominic remarked, looking up from the wine bottle with an impressed whistle. "That was decisive. Trouble in paradise, Val?" "Paradise burned down a long time ago, Dom," I replied, picking up my glass. The heavy crystal felt like a weapon, a beautiful, fragile anchor to this new reality. "Tonight, I'm just enjoying the ashes." I took a sip of the Margot. It was spectacular, bold, complex, with a finish that lingered on the palate. I leaned back into the plush leather booth, feeling the ambient warmth of the lounge soak into my bones. Outside, the first cracks of thunder rumbled, signaling the arrival of the deadly storm that was supposed to serve as my executioner. Let it rain. Let the tempest rage. I was exactly where I needed to be, and I wasn't moving an inch. Swirling the ruby liquid in my glass, I watched the storm unleash its fury against the lounge's reinforced floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain lashed against the glass in violent, erratic sheets, distorting the streetlights into smeared streaks of neon. It was out there, in that chaotic downpour, that my previous life had ended. Sitting safely inside, wrapped in the scent of roasted garlic, aged cheese, and expensive wine, the contrast was almost euphoric. "You're in a strange mood tonight, Val," Sabrina noted, cutting a slice of brie and placing it meticulously onto a water cracker. "Usually when Tristan calls, you look like a hostage negotiator preparing for a hostage crisis. Tonight, you look like, I don't know, a cat who just locked the dog out in the rain." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It felt strange in my throat, unused to the carefree resonance. "That's an incredibly accurate description, Brina. I suppose I've just reached my absolute limit." Dominic leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. As a ruthless corporate consultant who made his fortune tearing apart failing conglomerates, he had never hidden his disdain for my husband. "I've been telling you for 3 years that the man is a parasite," Dominic said, his dark eyes studying me intensely. "He contributes nothing to Vanguard Logistics except an inflated expense account and a smile that belongs on a used car salesman. If you've finally decided to cut the dead weight, I have 3 divorce attorneys on speed dial who would love to tear him to shreds." "I might not need an attorney, Dom," I murmured, taking another appreciative sip of the wine. "Tristan has a remarkable talent for destroying himself. I've just been getting in his way by constantly fixing his mistakes. Tonight, I decided to stop fixing things." What Dominic and Sabrina didn't know, couldn't possibly comprehend, was the absolute inferno currently engulfing Tristan's evening. By cutting off my phone, I hadn't just ignored a tantrum, I had severed his escape route. In my past life, his lie about the angry investors was a smokescreen to get the bearer bonds. But the truth I had uncovered post-mortem was much darker and far more convoluted. Tristan and Camilla hadn't just been planning to run away with my money. They were running from someone. Tristan had quietly leveraged massive, unsanctioned loans against Vanguard's shadow accounts to fund a series of catastrophic underground gambling debts. The people he owed weren't legitimate auditors. They were ruthless, violent creditors connected to a sprawling, illicit syndicate. Tristan had promised them a massive payout tonight at the penthouse. He had promised them the bonds that were locked in my safe. His entire survival strategy hinged on manipulating me into delivering that briefcase directly to the hotel lobby, where he would intercept it, hand it over to save his own skin, and then frame me for the embezzlement while fleeing with Camilla. Because I wasn't coming, Tristan was currently trapped in a luxury suite with a very impatient, very dangerous group of debt collectors, armed with nothing but empty promises and his fading charm. "So, what was the urgent crisis this time?" Sabrina asked, pouring herself another glass. "Did he buy a yacht by accident again? Or did he fire another executive assistant for looking at him wrong?" "He claimed there was a massive audit crisis," I lied smoothly, keeping the narrative close enough to reality to satisfy them. "He wanted me to rush downtown with sensitive physical files to help him cover up a discrepancy." Dominic's jaw tightened, his professional instincts instantly flaring. "Valerie, please tell me you didn't touch those files. If he's cooking the books?" "I didn't touch anything," I assured him, reaching over to pat his hand. "The files are safe. The company is secure." Tristan, however, is standing in the middle of a very deep hole with a shovel in his hands, wondering why the ladder disappeared. As if on cue, Dominic's smartwatch vibrated against his wrist. He glanced down at it casually, but his expression instantly shifted. The relaxed, conversational demeanor vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of a man who thrived on corporate blood in the water. He pulled his smartphone from his breast pocket and tapped the screen, his eyes scanning rapidly. "What is it?" Sabrina asked, noticing the shift in his posture. Dominic didn't answer immediately. He scrolled, his brow furrowing deeper. "Val, where exactly did you say Tristan was tonight?" "He told me he was at the penthouse suite at the St. Regis," I answered calmly, entertaining some high-level prospective clients. Dominic slowly lowered his phone, looking at me with a mixture of shock and profound wariness. "Are you psychic, Valerie? Or did you just orchestrate something terrifying?" "I've been sitting right here with you, enjoying a phenomenal Margot," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly innocent. "Why? What's happening?" Dominic turned his phone around and slid it across the mahogany table. It was an alert from a private local news scanner application he used to monitor emergency dispatches around the financial district. The bright red text on the screen read, "Active incident, St. Regis downtown, multiple units dispatched to penthouse level. Reports of forced entry, severe altercation, and potential hostage situation. SWAT on standby." Beneath the scanner alert, a Twitter feed was already exploding. Blurry cell phone videos from guests in the lobby showed heavily armed police officers swarming the elevators. One tweet from a prominent local journalist read, "Chaos at the St. Regis." Rumors circulating that a high-profile local CEO was found severely beaten in a suite alongside an unidentified woman. Narcotics and illegal firearms allegedly recovered at the scene. Sabrina gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Valerie, oh my God. Tristan is there." "He is," I agreed, my voice a quiet, emotionless whisper. I stared at the screen, watching the digital confirmation of his downfall roll in. Without the bearer bonds to buy off the syndicate, they had clearly lost their patience. They hadn't just broken his legs, they had likely torn the suite apart looking for collateral, drawing the attention of hotel security, which then escalated to a full-blown police raid. The syndicate members probably fled the moment the sirens wailed, leaving Tristan bloody, broken, and surrounded by the illicit drugs he and Camilla frequently indulged in. He was ruined. The scandal would obliterate his reputation. The criminal charges would strip him of his remaining dignity. And the sheer physical terror he must be experiencing right now, realizing that his devoted, gullible wife was never coming to save him, was a poetic justice so delicious it made the vintage wine taste like water in comparison. Should Should we call someone? Sabrina stammered, clearly panicked. A lawyer? The hospital? No, I said firmly, retrieving my glass and taking a long, luxurious sip. We are going to order the truffle risotto. Tristan has spent our entire marriage making his own bed. Tonight, I am going to let him lie in it. Morning broke with a crisp, indifferent brightness that felt entirely at odds with the sheer devastation broadcasting across every local news channel. I sat at my kitchen island, nursing a steaming mug of black espresso, watching the plasma screen television with the serene detachment of a theater critic reviewing a mediocre tragedy. The headline scrolling along the bottom of the screen was a masterpiece. Vanguard Logistics Executive, detained in bloody hotel bust. Illicit substances and firearms found. Footage played on a loop. It showed Tristan being wheeled out of the St. Regis on a stretcher, a neck brace securing his posture, his normally perfectly coiffed blonde hair matted with dark, drying blood. One of his eyes was swollen, completely shut, and his designer suit was torn to shreds. Walking briskly behind the paramedics, handcuffed and flanked by two stern-faced police officers, was Camilla. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in thick, ugly black rivers, her cocktail dress ruined. She looked terrified, wildly screaming something at the cameras that the news station had thankfully muted. I took a slow, appreciative sip of my espresso. The coffee had never tasted so rich. My phone, which I had finally turned back on at dawn, had over 70 missed calls and hundreds of text messages. They were from Tristan, Camilla, Vanguard's PR department, and Tristan's defense attorney, a sharp-toothed bulldog named Harrison Mitchell, whom I had always despised. I ignored them all, dialing only one number, Arthur Pendleton, the senior board member of Vanguard Logistics and my late father's oldest friend. Valerie, my God, Arthur answered on the first ring, his voice trembling with age and shock. Tell me you're seeing this. Tell me you are safe. I am perfectly safe, Arthur, I replied, my voice projecting calm authority. But Tristan has severely compromised this company. I need an emergency board meeting convened by 9 o'clock. We are stripping him of his executive title, freezing his corporate accounts, and initiating a full internal audit. I also want his proxy voting rights revoked immediately. Of course, my dear, Arthur stammered, clearly relieved to have someone taking charge of the hurricane. But what about the police? The optics? They're saying he owed money to the Petrov syndicate. Valerie, this could tank our stock. It won't, I assured him smoothly, because by noon, Vanguard Logistics will officially announce that we have been cooperating with authorities and have severed all ties with a rogue employee. Have the legal team draft the termination papers. I'll see you in an hour. The boardroom meeting was a bloodbath of corporate efficiency. With Dominic standing quietly by my side as an external consultant, we surgically dismantled every ounce of power Tristan held within the company. I handed over the encrypted ledgers, the real ones, completely untouched by Tristan's tampering to our lead forensic accountant. I watched the color drain from the faces of the board members as Dominic projected the evidence of Tristan's unauthorized shadow loans onto the screen. Gesient. 30 a.m. Tristan was officially unemployed, penniless, and facing a mountain of corporate embezzlement charges on top of his criminal drug and syndicate issues. With the company secured, it was time to play the role of the devastated wife. I arrived at Memorial Hospital just past noon, flanked by my own newly hired criminal defense attorney. 2 uniformed officers stood guard outside room 412. They stepped aside after verifying my identity, their eyes filled with misplaced pity. I pushed the heavy wooden door open. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale sweat. Tristan was lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to an IV, his right leg encased in a heavy plaster cast suspended in the air. His face was a canvas of purple and yellow bruises. Camilla was nowhere to be seen. She had been transferred directly to the county jail after booking. When Tristan heard the door click shut, his remaining good eye snapped open. A flash of desperate, pathetic relief washed over his battered features. Val, he croaked, his voice a raspy, painful wheeze. He reached a trembling, bruised hand out toward me. Val, thank God. Where were you? I called you so many times. I walked slowly to the foot of his bed, making no move to take his hand. I simply stood there, studying him. The man I had once loved unconditionally, the man I had died for in another life, looked small, weak, and entirely repulsive. I was at the cellar, I said evenly, my voice devoid of any warmth, having wine with Sabrina and Dominic. It was a lovely evening. Tristan recoiled as if I had physically struck him. You were having wine? Valerie, I was begging for my life. Those men, they broke in. They had guns. I told you to bring the briefcase. I know what you told me, Tristan, I replied, tilting my head, but I also know why you wanted it. You didn't need the bearer bonds to appease angry investors. You needed them to pay off a $500,000 gambling debt to the Petrov syndicate. His good eye widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. He tried to sit up, but a sharp wince of pain forced him back into the pillows. How do you know that? I know everything, I whispered, stepping closer to his bedside, leaning down so only he could hear me. I know about the shadow accounts. I know about the offshore shell companies you set up under my name. And, most importantly, I know about Camilla. Tristan choked on a breath, the heart monitor beside his bed rapidly accelerating, beeping in a frantic, panicked rhythm. She was quite chatty on the phone last night, I lied flawlessly, weaving a narrative he couldn't possibly disprove. When you pocket-dialed me during your little pre-escape celebration, I heard everything, Tristan. Is the stupid bitch on her way? That's what she asked right before the syndicate kicked your door down. Tears, hot and pathetic, spilled down his bruised cheeks. Valerie, please. It meant nothing. I was desperate. They were going to kill me. You have to help me. Get Mitchell down here. Bail me out. Bail Camilla out so she doesn't testify against me. Mitchell no longer works for you, I stated coldly, straightening my posture. Vanguard's board fired you this morning. Your corporate accounts are frozen and your proxy is revoked. As for bail, my attorney has already filed an emergency injunction freezing our joint marital assets, pending a massive divorce settlement and federal investigation. You can't do this, he screamed, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his split lip. I'm your husband! They're going to put me in prison! The Petrovs will kill me in there! You made your bed, Tristan, I said, turning my back on him and walking toward the door. I highly suggest you get comfortable in it. The ensuing weeks were a masterclass in systematic destruction. I didn't just burn Tristan's life to the ground. I salted the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. My interview with Detective Gallagher, the lead investigator on the syndicate case, was the performance of a lifetime. Sitting in the sterile, gray interrogation room, I played the part of the intelligent but tragically betrayed CEO perfectly. I handed over every piece of documentation I had covertly compiled. I showed them the forged signatures Tristan had used to secure the loans. I presented the offshore account routing numbers. Mrs. Sterling, excuse me, Valerie, Detective Gallagher said softly, sliding a terrifyingly thick manila folder across the metal table. We have surveillance footage of Camilla attempting to access a private jet charter at Teterboro Airport an hour before the raid. Did you have any knowledge of their flight risk? None, I answered, dabbing my dry eyes with a tissue. I thought my husband was working late to secure a merger. The betrayal. It's difficult to process, Detective. He intended to leave me holding the bag for his crimes. Well, he failed, Gallagher assured me, a grim smile touching his lips. Thanks to these ledgers, you are completely cleared of any suspicion. Tristan, however, is looking at 20 years for the financial fraud alone. The narcotics and the syndicate connections? He'll be lucky if he ever breathes free air again. Camilla folded first, as I knew she would. Facing 10 years as an accessory to embezzlement and drug trafficking, she took a plea deal. In exchange for immunity on the heavier charges, she testified against Tristan in a closed grand jury hearing detailing every one of his illegal operations, his debts, and his master plan to frame me. She painted him as a manipulative mastermind, claiming she was just a frightened, coerced victim. The media devoured her testimony. The public crucified him. The final blow came 6 months later, during the finalization of our divorce proceedings. The mediation took place in a high-security conference room at the federal courthouse. Tristan was escorted in, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed to a belly chain. The physical healing of his injuries only highlighted the hollow, haunted look in his eyes. He had lost at least 30 pounds. The arrogant, charming sociopath who had once commanded boardrooms was entirely gone, replaced by a twitching, terrified shell of a man. I sat across from him, wearing a bespoke, tailored suit that cost more than his current net worth. Dominic sat to my right, observing the proceedings with a look of profound, quiet satisfaction. Tristan's public defender, a weary, overworked man who clearly hated his client, slid the final settlement papers across the table. Because Tristan was a convicted felon who had actively attempted to defraud our marital estate, the judge had ruled heavily in my favor. I retained 100% ownership of Vanguard Logistics, our primary estate, all investment portfolios, and the vintage car collection he loved so dearly. Tristan was left with nothing but his mounting legal debts. "Sign on the dotted line, Tristan," my attorney instructed sharply, tapping a gold pen against the document. Tristan stared at the paper, his hands trembling violently as he picked up the pen. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for a mercy he didn't deserve. "Valerie," he whispered, his voice raspy, "I'm begging you. Just a little money for my commissary, the guys in my cell block. They know who I am. They know about the Petrovs. I need protection, money." I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the polished wood table. I looked directly into his eyes, allowing the mask of the polite, wronged wife to slip entirely. For the first time since the night of the crash that never happened, I let him see the cold, calculating ghost staring back at him. "Do you remember the night of the storm, Tristan?" I asked softly, my voice barely carrying over the hum of the air conditioner. He blinked, confused. "The night I was arrested?" "Yes," I replied. "You called me. You told me it was an emergency. You begged me to drive out in a torrential downpour to bring you the bearer bonds." "I remember," he stammered, looking nervously at the lawyers. "I was desperate." "I know," I smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "I was sitting at the cellar. I watched your call come in. I watched the screen flash, urgent." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the realization slowly dawn on his face. And I deliberately pressed decline. I sat there, drinking a 2012 Chateau Margaux, and I waited for the police scanners to announce your downfall. Tristan stopped breathing. The pen slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly onto the table. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he finally understood. I hadn't been lucky. I hadn't been oblivious. I had been the architect of his destruction. I had held the rope, and I had simply let him hang himself. "You!" he gasped, straining against his chains. "You knew! You let them tear me apart!" "Sign the papers, Tristan," I commanded, my voice turning to ice. "Before I decide to take your commissary money and use it to hire a new security firm for the company. I hear Romanov's brother from the Petrov syndicate is looking for legitimate consulting work." Tristan practically choked on a sob. He snatched the pen and scrawled his name across the documents with shaking, frantic motions, desperate to end the meeting, desperate to get away from me. As the guards hauled him to his feet and led him out of the room, he didn't look back. I gathered my files, tucked them neatly into my leather briefcase, and walked out into the bright, sunny afternoon. The air smelled of rain, but the storm was finally over. I had Vanguard. I had my life. And then I had the profound, unshakable knowledge that sometimes the best way to win a war is to simply let your enemy defeat themselves. Did Valerie's brutal, calculated revenge satisfy your craving for karma? Let us know in the comments if you would have ignored Tristan's call, or if you would have plotted an even darker downfall. If you loved this story of rebirth and ultimate retribution, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping audio dramas.